Ambassador Park gazed out through the glass dome of the central communication tower. The twin moons of Aldaria cast an eerie blue glow across the crystalline buildings of the capital city. It would have been beautiful if not for the crushing weight of fear pressing down on his chest. He turned back to the emergency broadcast controls, his 4 slender hands trembling as they moved across the holographic interface. 27 years as the Aldarian Confederation's chief diplomat had never prepared him for this moment, the moment when all their peaceful ideals and technological achievements meant nothing. "Ambassador, the latest scans," whispered his aide, sliding a transparent datapad across the smooth surface of the command table. Park studied the numbers with growing horror. The Voidborn swarm had accelerated. They would reach Aldaria's outer defense grid in less than 4 planetary rotations, not the week they had originally calculated. "Have the Tellurians responded to our request for assistance?" Park asked, though he already knew the answer from his aide's downcast eyes. "No, Ambassador. The Tellurians have gone silent, just like the Mavasi before them, and the Orin before that." The aide's voice cracked. "It appears their systems have already fallen." Around the circular chamber, the remaining members of the Aldarian High Council sat in stunned silence. Their species had survived and thrived for thousands of years through diplomacy, arts, and technological innovation. They had no standing. Military had never needed one. The concept of warfare was something studied in ancient history texts, not a present reality. "Our planetary shields will hold for 3 days at most," said Chief Engineer Doe, her voice steady despite the tremor in her lower hands. "The evacuation ships can only accommodate 30% of our population, and we have no guarantee the Voidborn won't simply follow them." Park closed his inner eyelids, focusing his thoughts. The Aldarian Confederation had friends across 17 star systems, allies who shared their values of peace and cooperation. But one by one, those allies were falling silent as the Voidborn, a previously unknown entity that seemed to consume all in its path, moved through their sector of the galaxy. "There is one option we haven't considered," said Elder Tay, the oldest member of the council. The room fell even quieter. Elder Tay rarely spoke, but when she did, even the youngest members knew to listen. "No," said Security Director Song immediately. "We cannot even consider that path. The quarantine was established for good reason." "What option?" asked Park, though from the sudden tension in the room, he suspected what was coming. Elder Tay's eyes, cloudy with age, but still sharp with intelligence, fixed on him. "The humans." A collective intake of breath swept through the chamber. Humans. The very word caused discomfort among the council. A species isolated behind a quarantine barrier established by the Galactic Alliance nearly 70 years ago. A species deemed too unpredictable, too aggressive, too dangerous to be included in the civilized interactions of developed worlds. "We would be violating the highest laws of the Alliance," said Director Song. "There may be no Alliance left to enforce." "Those laws if the Voidborn continue unchecked," countered Elder Tay. "I was there when the quarantine was established. Yes, the humans are frightening in their capacity for violence, but they also showed remarkable loyalty to those they considered under their protection." Park felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He thought of the billions of Aldarians going about their daily lives in the cities below, unaware that their entire civilization stood on the brink of extinction. "The emergency broadcast system includes the forbidden frequency," said Chief Engineer Doe quietly. "The one that would penetrate the quarantine barrier around the human system. It was never removed from our technology, just locked away." Park looked at the faces around him. The fear, the uncertainty, the fading hope. He made his decision. "Open the locked protocols," he ordered. Director Song stood abruptly. "Ambassador, I must formally register my objection." "Noted," said Park. "And if we survive this, I will gladly face whatever consequences come. But I will not stand by while our world falls without trying every possible option." The technicians worked quickly, unlocking the forgotten protocols that would allow their signal to breach the barrier that had kept humans isolated from the rest of the galaxy. Park stepped to the transmission array, aware that he was about to break the most solemn agreement in Alliance history. "This is Ambassador Park of the Aldarian Confederation," he began, his voice growing steadier as he spoke. Our civilization faces extinction from an entity we call the Voidborn. They have already consumed 3 neighboring systems. Our defenses will fail within days. We have no weapons, no armies." He paused, then added the words that he hoped might move the quarantined species. "There are 20 billion innocent lives at stake. We need help. Any help." He ended the transmission and looked up at the star map displayed on the vast ceiling. Of the chamber, somewhere out there was Earth, home of the humans, beings who had shocked the galactic community with both their capacity for violence and their rapid technological advancement. "Now we wait," said Elder Tay softly. But in his heart, Park wondered if they had just invited something even more terrifying than the Voidborn to their doorstep. 2 long days passed with no answer to their desperate call. Ambassador Park hadn't left the central communication tower, catching brief moments of sleep in an uncomfortable chair, while technicians monitored all frequencies for any response. The waiting was almost worse than the approaching doom. Outside, the capital city continued its normal rhythm, the government having decided against causing panic until absolutely necessary. "Sir, the evacuation ships are ready," reported Director Song, who had opposed contacting the humans but was professional enough to continue his duties without further protest. "We can begin boarding the priority citizens within 6 hours." Park nodded absently, his eyes fixed on the massive display showing the Voidborn swarm's relentless advance. Already, long-range sensors could detect the strange energy signature that preceded their arrival. Scientists still didn't understand what the Voidborn were, some kind of collective organism, a technological plague, or something entirely beyond their comprehension. "We should have heard something by now," Park said, more to himself than anyone else. From someone, Chief Engineer Doe approached with a steaming cup of blue liquid, a mild stimulant that had kept the command staff functioning through their extended shifts. "The Alliance races are likely focusing on their own defenses," she said gently. "And as for the humans, perhaps the quarantine barrier is more effective than we realized." Park accepted the drink gratefully. Or perhaps they simply don't care about the fate of a civilization they've never met. The words had barely left his mouth when every alarm in the command center blared to life simultaneously. The main display flickered, showing dozens of energy signatures appearing just beyond Aldaria's outermost moon. "We're being invaded!" shouted one of the younger technicians, panic evident in his voice. "No," said Elder Tay, who had insisted on remaining with the command staff despite her advanced age. She squinted at the readings. "Those energy signatures, they're not Voidborn." Before anyone could respond, the communication system activated. The central holographic projector flickered and then resolved into the image of a being that caused several Aldarians to step back instinctively. The human was female, judging by the secondary physical characteristics their scientists had documented before the quarantine. She wore what appeared to be a uniform of some kind, dark blue with silver markings on the shoulders. Her facial features were unsettlingly predatory to Aldarian sensibilities, forward-facing eyes, exposed teeth when she spoke, and a complete lack of the natural blue-green skin tone that signified health among their own kind. "This is Captain Kim of the United Earth Defense Force," the human said in a voice that somehow managed to convey both authority and calm. "We received your distress call and have responded with our nearest available battle group. Please acknowledge receipt of this transmission." The command center erupted into a chaos of whispered conversations and exclamations. Park stepped forward, trying to maintain the dignified composure expected of an Aldarian diplomat despite the shock coursing through him. "This is Ambassador Park of the Aldarian Confederation. We acknowledge your transmission, Captain Kim, and we are most grateful for your response." The human's expression remained difficult to read. Their facial movements were so different from Aldarian expressions. Was that a smile? A grimace? "We've detected the approaching hostile force," Captain Kim continued. "Our sensors indicate they'll reach your outer defense grid in approximately 72 hours. We're deploying advanced teams to your surface to coordinate defense strategies with your permission." Park glanced at Director Song, whose expressions were much easier to interpret: shock, disbelief, and lingering suspicion. "Captain," Park said carefully, "we are deeply appreciative of your willingness to assist us, But I must inform you that we have no military forces to coordinate with. Yours. The Aldarian Confederation has been a peaceful society for over 2,000 years. Something flickered across the human's face. Surprise, perhaps. Understood, Ambassador. In that case, we'll need to handle the combat operations ourselves. We'll still need to send down coordination teams to interface with your planet's defense systems and establish evacuation protocols if necessary. The main display changed, showing an enhanced view of the human vessels. They were unlike anything in the Alliance database, angular, functional-looking ships that lacked the elegant aesthetics of Aldarian design. They were clearly built for a single purpose: warfare. Director Song stepped forward. The Council needs to discuss this development before— With respect, Park interrupted. We don't have time for extended deliberations. The Voidborn will be here in 3 days. He turned back to the human captain. You have our permission to send your teams, Captain Kim. We'll provide any assistance we can. After the transmission ended, the Aldarian High Council gathered in an emergency session. The chamber was filled with voices ranging from hopeful relief to outright terror. Do you understand what you've done? Demanded Council Member Han, his voice rising above the others. You've invited the most violent species known to the Alliance onto our homeworld? I've invited the only species who answered our call for help, Park replied firmly. Elder Tay raised her hand and the chamber quieted out of respect. I was younger than any of you when the quarantine was established, she said. I remember the humans. Yes, they frightened us with their capacity for conflict. But they also showed remarkable courage. Their history is filled with examples of them risking themselves for others, and just as many examples of them destroying each other, countered Han. The debate was interrupted when a technician rushed into the chamber. Ambassador, the human vessels, they're moving to intercept the Voidborn advance force. The council members hurried to the observation platform. On the massive display, they watched as 3 of the human ships accelerated toward a small contingent of Voidborn scouts that had been approaching Aldarian space. What are they doing? Whispered Chief Engineer Do. That's a suicide mission. They watched in stunned silence as the human vessels engaged the Voidborn scouts in a battle unlike anything the Aldarians had ever witnessed. The humans fought with a combination of precision and aggression that seemed impossible, their ships maneuvering in ways that defied conventional tactics, weapons firing in coordinated patterns that actually seemed to damage the previously unstoppable enemy. Within 20 minutes, the Voidborn scouts had been destroyed or driven off. Not a single human ship was lost. Perhaps, said Elder Tay quietly, we have been fortunate in our choice of allies after all. Park nodded slowly but couldn't shake the cold feeling spreading through him. They had indeed found the help they so desperately needed. But at what cost? And what would happen after the battle if they survived? The humans had been quarantined for good reasons. They had just invited the most dangerous predators in known space to their homeworld. Then those predators were about to land. The first human shuttle landed in the central plaza of the Aldarian capital, just as the twin suns reached their midday peak. Ambassador Park stood at the head of a hastily assembled reception committee, trying to project calm confidence for the benefit of the growing crowd of curious citizens who had gathered behind the security barriers. News of the human arrival had spread quickly, causing equal parts hope and fear among the population. Remember, Park murmured to his fellow officials, no sudden movements. Human sensory systems are highly attuned to detect potential threats. The shuttle's door hissed open, releasing a cloud of vapor that momentarily obscured the entrance. When it cleared, the Aldarians got their first close look at humans in over 70 years. They emerged in what was clearly a military formation, 6 soldiers in dark armored suits flanking a central figure. The armor alone was enough to make several Aldarian officials step back involuntarily. Unlike the elegant, lightweight protection their own security forces occasionally wore for ceremonial purposes, the human combat suits seemed designed not just for protection, but for intimidation. Angular plates covered vital areas, with flexible material at the joints allowing for full range of movement. Most disturbing were the helmets, with their darkened visors concealing the wearers' faces, giving them an anonymous, machine-like appearance. Central figure stepped forward and removed her helmet, revealing herself as Captain Kim from the earlier transmission. Up close, the alienness of human physiognomy was even more apparent. The flat face, the predatory forward-facing eyes, the strange coloration of her skin and hair. She moved with a fluid grace that reminded Park uncomfortably of the hunting animals kept in Aldaria's wildlife preserves. "Ambassador Park," she said, extending her hand in what Park recognized from old records as a human greeting gesture. "Thank you for welcoming us to your world." Park hesitated only briefly before extending his upper right hand to complete the gesture. The human's grip was firm but controlled, as if she was consciously restraining her strength. "Captain Kim. Behalf of the Aldarian people, I welcome you and thank you for answering our call." Behind Captain Kim, another human removed his helmet. This one was male, with different facial features and coloration than the captain, though the same unsettling, predatory grace. "This is General Lee," Captain Kim introduced him. "He'll be coordinating our ground defense operations." The general nodded, but didn't offer the hand gesture. His eyes were constantly moving, scanning the plaza, the buildings, the crowd, assessing, analyzing, looking for threats. Park felt a chill run through him. This was a being evolved for warfare whose ancestors had survived by hunting and killing. "We should move this inside," General Lee said, his voice deeper than the captain's. "Too exposed out here." Within an hour, the central command tower had been transformed. Human soldiers had established a perimeter, setting up equipment that Park didn't recognize but assumed were weapons or defense systems. In the main strategic chamber, General Lee had wasted no time in establishing what he called a command post, rearranging the elegant Aldarian furniture to create a central table, where holographic displays now showed both the approaching Voidborn swarm and the positions of the human fleet. "I need all available information on these Voidborn," General Lee said without preamble when the Aldarian High Council had assembled. "Tactical data, previous encounters, vulnerabilities, anything you have." Chief Science Officer Ju stepped forward nervously. "We have limited tactical information, General. The Aldarian Confederation has not engaged in warfare for over 2,000 years. We are observers, scholars—" "What about the other worlds that have been attacked?" interrupted Lee. "Surely you have observer reports, communications, sensor—" "Data," Park intervened. "We have compiled what information we could gather from the worlds that fell before us. It's not much. Communications were cut off quickly in each case." He gestured to an aide who transferred the data to the human systems. General Lee and his staff began reviewing it immediately, their faces grim as they absorbed the extent of the Voidborn's destructive capabilities. "Casualties?" Lee asked, looking up from the displays. "Total," replied Science Officer Ju quietly. 3 entire civilizations, approximately 47 billion sentient beings gone within weeks." The humans exchanged glances that Park couldn't interpret. Was it fear? Doubt? But when General Lee turned back to address them, his expression showed something else entirely: determination. "Based on these projections, your planetary shields will fail within 72 hours of sustained assault," he said. "Our plan is to engage the Voidborn before they reach your atmosphere. Captain Kim's fleet will handle the space-based defense, while my ground forces will deploy to key locations to counter any Voidborn that make it to the surface." He displayed a casualty projection that made several council members gasp. "Even with our intervention, we're looking at potential casualties in the millions." "Millions?" whispered Council Member Han. "But that's catastrophic." General Lee's expression didn't change. "Without our intervention, your casualty rate would be 100%. We've faced worse odds." It was this statement, delivered with such matter-of-fact confidence, that perhaps terrified the Aldarians more than anything else about their new allies. What kind of species could look at such death and destruction with such calm acceptance? Throughout the day, more human shuttles arrived, bringing soldiers, equipment and weapon systems that were quickly deployed around the capital and other major population centers. The Aldarians watched with a mixture of hope and horror as the humans moved among them, efficient, focused and utterly alien in their movements and behaviors. Late that evening, Park found himself standing on an observation platform with Captain Kim, watching as human troops established defensive positions along the city's perimeter. "Your people fear us," Kim said suddenly. It wasn't a question. Park considered denying it, then decided on honesty. Yes, your species was quarantined because you frightened the Alliance races. Your capacity for violence, your evolutionary history as predators. Kim nodded, unsurprised. And yet you called us when you needed that capacity for violence. We had no choice, Park admitted. There's something you should understand about humans, Ambassador, Kim said, turning to face him directly. The same. Instincts that make us effective warriors also drive us to protect. Throughout our history, the most respected members of our society weren't those who fought for personal gain, but those who fought to defend others. Before Park could respond, an alarm sounded. Both turned to see a new holographic display appearing above the city. The Voidborn main force had accelerated. They would reach Aldaria within 24 hours, not the 3 days previously. Estimated, General Lee's voice came through the communication system, calm despite the dire news. All units move to alert status Alpha. Civilian evacuation protocols are now in effect. This is not a drill. Park watched as the human soldiers below responded instantly to the command, their movements precise and coordinated. For the first time, he felt something beyond fear when looking at the humans, a growing sense that perhaps, just perhaps, these terrifying allies were exactly what Aldaria needed in its darkest hour, because the darkness was coming faster than anyone had expected, and only the humans seemed truly ready to face it. The Voidborn arrived during the darkest part of the Aldarian night. First came a ripple in the upper atmosphere, a distortion that the human sensors detected before the Aldarian systems could process it. Then the sky itself seemed to tear open, as the first wave emerged from whatever dimension or space they traveled through. From the emergency command center deep beneath the capital city, Ambassador Park and the remaining members of the High Council watched on the holographic displays as humanity's ships moved to intercept. The human vessels looked absurdly small against the vast, shifting mass of the Voidborn, a churning cloud of what appeared to be living darkness dotted with points of sickly green light. All ships engage according to Battle Plan Theta. Captain Kim's voice came through the communications system, impossibly calm given the circumstances. She stood at the command table, her face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays. Focus fire on the concentration points I've marked. Remember, your training. We've studied the data, they can be hurt. Park watched in horrified fascination as the human fleet executed maneuvers that seemed to defy conventional physics. Their ships didn't move in the predictable, efficient patterns that Aldarian vessels would have employed. Instead, they adopted what appeared to be chaotic, random trajectories that somehow, impossibly, allowed them to avoid the Voidborn's initial attacks while delivering devastating counterstrikes of their own. "They're actually damaging them," whispered Chief Science Officer Ju, her eyes wide as she studied the readings. "The energy weapons the humans are using, they're disrupting the Voidborn's molecular cohesion somehow." For a brief, hopeful moment, it seemed the human fleet might actually repel the invasion before it reached Aldaria's atmosphere. Then a massive surge of energy erupted from the center of the Voidborn swarm, striking 2 human vessels simultaneously. The ships didn't explode as Park had expected. Instead, they simply ceased to exist, disappearing in a flash of light that left nothing behind. "Eagle and Thunderbird are gone," reported one of the human officers, his voice tight but controlled. "No survivors detected." Park expected Captain Kim to retreat, to call for reinforcements, to show some reaction to the loss of what must have been hundreds of her people. Instead, she simply nodded and adjusted the tactical display. "All vessels form up in pattern Delta. Concentrate fire on Sector 7. We need to punch a hole in their left flank." The battle in space continued with an intensity that the observing Eldarians could barely comprehend. The humans fought with a combination of tactical precision and wild improvisation, constantly adapting to the Voidborn's attacks. But despite their efforts, it soon became clear that some of the enemy would reach the planet's surface. "We've slowed them down and thinned their numbers, but we can't stop them all," General Lee reported from his position at the city's defense perimeter. "Captain, we need you to keep engaging the main force up there. My ground teams will handle whatever gets through." The first Voidborn entities breached Aldaria's upper atmosphere an hour later. The planetary shield system, the pride of Aldarian technology, held for precisely 17 minutes before failing catastrophically. Across the capital city, civilians huddled in emergency shelters, listening to the strange sounds coming from outside, the whine of human weapons, the unearthly screeching of the Voidborn, and most disturbing of all, the battle cries of the human soldiers. Ambassador Park had insisted on moving to the ground command post despite the danger. He needed to see, to understand what was happening to his world. The command post had been established in what was once a cultural center, its graceful architecture now reinforced with human defensive technology. Through armored viewing ports, Park witnessed humanity at war, the Voidborn that reached the eye. Surface took physical form, writhing masses of dark matter that coalesced into roughly humanoid shapes, 3 times the size of an Aldarian. They moved with terrible purpose toward the population centers, seeming to sense the concentration of life forms. And wherever they appeared, human soldiers were there to meet them. What shocked Park most wasn't the advanced weapons the humans wielded, though those were impressive enough, cutting through void-born matter with concentrated energy beams or explosive force. No, what truly stunned him was the humans themselves, their physical resilience and their relentless determination. He watched as a female soldier was struck by a void-born tendril, the impact throwing her 20 meters across the plaza. By all logic, she should have been dead or at least incapacitated. Instead, she rolled to her feet, bleeding from a gash across her face, and charged back into combat, firing her weapon with deadly accuracy. In another sector, 3 human soldiers found themselves surrounded by void-born entities. Instead of retreating, they positioned themselves back to back and fought with coordinated precision, communicating through short, sharp phrases that didn't even sound like normal language to Park's translator. Most disturbing of all was the sound. Human battle cries, primal aggressive vocalizations that seemed to trigger some deep instinctive fear response even in the Aldarians observing from safety. The humans didn't just fight silently and efficiently. They fought with passion, with emotion, with what almost seemed like a terrible joy in testing themselves against a worthy enemy. They're actually pushing them back in sectors 3 and 4, reported one of the Aldarian technicians monitoring the battle. The Voidborn are retreating. General Lee didn't share the technician's optimism. They're regrouping. Prepare for the second wave. The second wave came with even greater ferocity than the first. Voidborn entities breached the defensive perimeter in multiple locations simultaneously. Human casualties mounted rapidly. "We're losing ground in the eastern quadrant," reported a human officer, his voice steady despite the chaos visible on the tactical displays behind him. "Request reinforcements." "Negative," replied General Lee. "All reserves are committed. Hold your position at all costs." "Understood, sir. We'll hold." Hold they did, though at terrible cost. Park watched as the human defenders in the eastern quadrant were gradually reduced, from 30 soldiers to 20, then 15, then barely a dozen. Yet they continued fighting with undiminished intensity, adapting their tactics, using the environment to their advantage, refusing to yield even a meter of ground without extracting a heavy price from the Voidborn. Throughout the night, the battle raged across the city and in the space above. Human ships performing maneuvers that Park wouldn't have believed possible if he hadn't seen them himself. Human soldiers fighting with a combination of tactical discipline and berserker fury that bewildered and terrified the watching Aldarians. And somehow, impossibly, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the tide began to turn. The coordinated attacks from space and ground forces had disrupted whatever passed for the Voidborn's command structure. Their assaults became less organized, more chaotic. Gaps appeared in their formations that the humans were quick to exploit. "They're losing cohesion," Captain Kim reported from her ship. "All vessels press the advantage. Don't give them time to regroup." By mid-morning, the remaining Voidborn in the atmosphere were in full retreat, pursued relentlessly by human vessels. On the ground, the last pockets of resistance were being systematically eliminated by human strike teams. Park stepped outside the command post for the first time in hours, surveying the devastation of what had once been a beautiful cultural plaza. Parts of the city were in ruins. Smoke rose from numerous buildings, And everywhere he looked were the bodies of human soldiers who had given their lives to defend a world not their own. Yet among the destruction walked the survivors, human medics tending to their wounded with efficient care, human engineers already beginning to secure damaged infrastructure, human soldiers standing vigilant, watching for any sign that the enemy might return. Park approached a group of soldiers who were taking a brief rest, drinking from their water supplies and checking their equipment. They looked up as he approached, faces streaked with dirt and blood, eyes alert even in their exhaustion. "Your people fought remarkably," Park said, finding his command of human expressions of gratitude inadequate. One of the soldiers, her arm bandaged where a void-born tendril had burned through her armor, gave a small shrug. "Just doing our job, sir," as if dying for an alien world was the most natural thing in the universe. 3 days after the final void-born entity was eliminated from Aldarian space, the true scale of what had happened began to sink in. The capital city bore the scars of battle. Elegant crystal towers now stood with jagged breaks. Once pristine plazas were scarred by weapon fire, and the normally immaculate waterways ran cloudy with debris. Yet amid the destruction, something remarkable was happening. Humans and Aldarians worked side by side to clear rubble, restore power systems, and tend to the injured. The same soldiers who had fought with such terrifying ferocity now showed gentle patience as they helped elderly Aldarians navigate damaged streets or lifted heavy beams that no Aldarian could move. Ambassador Park made his way through what had once been the Grand Avenue, now serving as a makeshift medical center. Human medics had set up treatment stations where they cared for injured Aldarians with the same attention they gave their own wounded. The sight still struck him as surreal. These alien beings whose evolutionary history as predators had so terrified the galactic community were now carefully bandaging the delicate appendages of Aldarian children. "Ambassador," called a voice. He recognized. Captain Kim approached, looking exhausted but alert. Like many of the human soldiers, she had discarded parts of her armor in the warm Aldarian day, revealing the simple uniform beneath. A bandage covered one side of her face where a void-born attack had left its mark. "Captain," Park acknowledged, "I was just coming to find you. The High Council is prepared to formally thank you and your people for what you've done." Kim nodded, looking around at the damaged cityscape. "We've lost 37 ships and over 2,000 personnel, but considering what we were up against, the casualty numbers could have been much worse." The casual way she referenced such massive losses still unsettled Park. 2,000 lives, each one a thinking, feeling being with its own hopes and dreams and connections. Yet the humans spoke of their dead with a stoic acceptance that the Aldarians struggled to comprehend. "Your sacrifice will not be forgotten," Park said formally. "The Aldarian Confederation will honor your fallen and ensure that their memory lives on in our histories." Something flickered across the captain's face, perhaps surprise or maybe appreciation. "Thank you. That would mean a lot to their families back home." They walked together through the medical center, past humans and Aldarians working in what would have been unimaginable cooperation just a week earlier. Park had questions that had been troubling him since the battle ended, questions he wasn't sure how to pose diplomatically. Kim seemed to sense his hesitation. "Something on your mind, Ambassador?" "Several things, actually." Park chose his words carefully. "The quarantine around your system has been in place for 70 years. The official alliance records state that it was established with your government's agreement after incidents that demonstrated humanity's incompatibility with galactic society." "That's the diplomatic version, yes." Kim's expression remained neutral. "Yet you answered our call for help when no one else would. You sacrificed your people for ours, strangers who had kept you isolated for generations." They stopped at the edge of the plaza, looking out over the city where human construction teams were helping Aldarians stabilize a damaged residential tower. "Why?" Park asked finally. "Why did you answer our call when the rest of the galaxy ignored us?" Kim was quiet for a long moment, watching as a human soldier lifted an Aldarian child onto his shoulders to give her a better view of the repair work. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "The quarantine wasn't just the Alliance's decision, Ambassador. It was ours too in many ways. The first contact period was difficult for both sides. Your alliance encountered something it didn't understand and couldn't control. We encountered a reality we weren't prepared for, that we were seen as monsters by much of the galactic community. She gestured toward a group of human soldiers, sharing a meal with Aldarian civil workers, the two species awkwardly but earnestly trying to communicate despite their differences. After the incidents that led to the quarantine, our leaders decided it might be better for everyone if we developed on our own path for a while. But we never fully disconnected. We maintained monitoring of Alliance communications, officially for defense purposes, but really because we hoped someday there might be a path back. And our distress call provided that path, Park said, understanding dawning. Kim nodded. When we received your transmission, there was debate, of course. Some felt it wasn't our problem, that the Alliance had made its choice to exclude us, but in the end, the decision wasn't complicated. She shrugged slightly. Someone needed help. We could provide it. That's what humans do. Park considered this simple explanation, finding it both compelling and somewhat difficult to fully grasp. Even at such cost to yourselves? Especially then, Kim said. Look, Ambassador, I won't pretend humans are perfect. Our history is full of conflict, cruelty, and mistakes. The Alliance wasn't wrong about everything. We can be dangerous, but the same instincts that make us effective warriors also drive us to protect what we value. And we've always valued life. Not just human life, but life in all its forms. A commotion drew their attention to a nearby building where a human engineering team had successfully restored power. Lights flickered on across the district, and a spontaneous cheer rose from both humans and Aldarians. I think perhaps we misunderstood your species, Park admitted. We saw the capacity for violence and assumed it was the dominant trait. We failed to see the context for that capacity. Kim smiled slightly. To be fair, we probably could have done a better job explaining ourselves 70 years ago. We've had some time to mature as a species since then. Later that evening, Park stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Alliance Council, or what remained of it after the Voidborn attacks. The holographic meeting space flickered occasionally as damaged communication systems struggled to maintain the connection between surviving worlds. The Aldarian Confederation formally petitions for the immediate end of the quarantine around the human system, Park stated, his voice firm despite the murmurs of surprise from the assembled representatives. Furthermore, we propose that humanity be invited to join the Alliance as full members, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. The Alliance chairperson, a Tellurian whose own world had barely survived the Voidborn, looked skeptical. Ambassador Park, while we acknowledge the assistance the humans provided in this crisis, their fundamental nature remains unchanged. The quarantine was established for valid reasons. With respect, Chairperson, I believe we fundamentally misunderstood their nature, Park countered. Yes, humans have capacity for violence that exceeds most Alliance species, but they also possess a moral framework that channels that capacity toward protection rather than conquest. They answered our call when no one else would. They died by the thousands defending a people they had never met. He transmitted the compiled records of the battle for Aldaria, the human ships sacrificing themselves to protect civilian evacuation routes, the soldiers holding impossibly defensive positions to buy time for Aldarian families to reach safety, the medics working themselves to exhaustion to save alien lives. I have come to believe, Park continued, that in our fear of humanity's differences, we deprived ourselves of their greatest strengths. The Alliance faces threats it was never designed to counter. The Voidborn may be defeated for now, but they will return. And when they do, I would rather have the humans fighting alongside us than isolated behind a quarantine barrier. As the debate continued among the Alliance representatives, Park received a private communication from Earth. It was brief, just a few lines from the human leadership, accepting his invitation to send representatives to Aldaria for preliminary discussions about their future relationship with galactic society. Outside the communication chamber, he found Captain Kim waiting. She would be returning to her ship soon as the human forces began their gradual withdrawal from Aldarian space, leaving behind only the engineering and medical teams that would continue the recovery efforts. Your council has agreed to support ending the quarantine, Park told her. It will take time for the Alliance to reach consensus, but I believe the process has begun. Kim nodded, seemingly unsurprised. And how do your people feel about that? About us? Park considered the question seriously. There is still fear, of course. You remain disconcerting to many Aldarians. But there is gratitude, too, and curiosity, and a growing recognition that the galaxy is more dangerous than we believed. We need allies who understand how to face that danger. And you trust us not to become the danger ourselves? Kim asked quietly. Park looked out over the city where humans and Aldarians continued their work side by side, rebuilding what had nearly been lost. I believe we have misunderstood each other for too long, he said finally. The Alliance feared your capacity for violence without recognizing your capacity for sacrifice. Perhaps it's time we all learn to see each other more clearly. As the twin suns set over the recovering city, Park knew that nothing would ever be quite the same. The comfortable isolation that had defined Aldarian society for millennia had been shattered, not just by the Voidborn attack, but by their unexpected saviors. The humans had shown them both the darkest and brightest possibilities of existence. They had shown that sometimes, when all hope was lost, salvation came from the most unlikely and terrifying of places. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all.